Hello, welcome back to the Variance Betting Show. My name is Ted Knutson. I am a former professional sports bettor. I also helped rebuild one of the world's largest offshore bookies. I then built StatsBomb, which is one of the world's best data companies for sport in both types of football. And then I had a little detour in there where I helped build the foundation of the team called Brentford that's currently in the Premier League. I started with them when they came out of League One. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of things, one of which has been confusing people. So I wanted to give you a little bit of information about what Asian handicap betting is. And then we're going to just jump into the bets and the game analysis this week so that everybody can have my thoughts on what's going to happen in the Premier League. And then we'll give you some wrap-up stuff and where you can find our newsletter that covers this and much, much more on a weekly basis. So let's get rolling. Right. Asian handicap betting. So the numbers that you'll see when I'm doing betting look different than your traditional 1x2, if that's what you're used to. These are what's called Asian handicaps. They're much closer to an American spread that you would see in like American football or basketball than they are sort of just the traditional 1x2, which is this team going to win? Will there be a draw? Or is the other team going to win? Now, there are some reasons why we prefer Asian handicap betting, and it'll become very clear once we talk about an example. But the reason why we generally prefer as a gambler to bet on Asian handicaps versus 1x2s is the VIG, or the margin that you pay the bookie on an Asian handicap line, is more like 2 to 2.5% versus 5 to 9% that you pay on the 1x2 at some gambling houses. So we, as professional bettors, definitely prefer paying less money to the bookie simply to place our wager. Therefore, that's why we inherently like Asian handicaps. But the other reason we like them is because it helps deal with huge mismatches. And the idea here is to create lines that are close to 50-50 in outcome. So for example, this weekend, Arsenal are minus 2.25 handicap against Southampton at home. Now, what this means is that if Arsenal were to win by 1, you would lose that bet if you were on Arsenal. So say you bet Arsenal minus 2.25. If they win by 1, they draw. If Southampton win, you lose all those bets. If they win by 2, you would lose half of that bet. If they win by 3 or more, then you would win your bet. So it handles this in a much sort of better way for gambling purposes than saying, hey, Arsenal are 88%, so I have to put like a ton of money down if I just think Arsenal's going to win the game. Now you're trying to say, how much is Arsenal most likely to win the game by? And if you think it's less than that, or if you think that the dog has a good chance of either drawing or actually winning the game outright, then you would bet on that side. We're going to put the link in this that explains kind of more about Asian handicapping, especially around the draw, down in the show notes. So if you have any questions, like it's a pretty good guide that tells you what happens at all the different Asian handicaps. To give like a brief explanation, though, our traditional 1x2 assumes that the home team has a handicap of minus 0.5. Minus 0.5 means that you can't push on anything. It's either you win your bet or you lose your bet. And so in this case, for example, again, this weekend, Brentford are minus 0.5 at home to Wolves. Now, the 1x2 is Brentford at 2.07. The draw there would be 3.67 in the market right now, and Wolves win would be 3.59. You could bet on each of those individually, but the VIG on those is usually, basically double what we would get on an Asian handicap. So if you're trying to make sure that you're betting in the most efficient way possible and also make sure that you pay the least VIG over time, you're possibly looking more at the handicap spread. So in this case, if Brentford win, you're paying 2.07. That's what you're choosing. You're saying, I think Brentford will win. If they win by any amount, then 2.07 is the price on that. Or if you think that it's most likely to have a draw or Wolves will win, then you would pay 1.84. So like that's the gap between the two of those. That's a little explanation of how these two things are tied together, at least at one particular number. If you like our content, we are at thetransferflow.com. We actually have a daily newsletter. Thetransferflow.com/subscribe. The daily newsletter is usually transfer content, but also we talk about the Champions League this week. We'll talk about midweek matches. Every Monday is a wrap up of trends that we saw in the Premier League with a focus on statistical analysis and also just like really smart, insightful stuff from people who used to work in football. Both myself and Kim, who writes the other half of the newsletter, we have worked in football for a number of years. If you're a podcast fan, you can see Ravi Ramaneni, who also has worked in football for a long time. So we are football industry insiders. who still have some inside information, but we're giving away all of this stuff for free. And then we also have the Variance betting newsletter, which is partly what this video is about. Variance betting comes out basically every Friday that there are English Premier League and Championship matches. And then we've done some midweek stuff, especially this past week on the Champions League and also on English Championship. So very, very busy week this last week. That one's a premium newsletter. There is a cost to subscribe, but the transferflow.com is free. So, all right, we're going to tuck into some game analysis here. This one is the first matchup we've got is the 12:30 matchup, Crystal Palace versus Liverpool. Liverpool heading to London on this one. And the handicap on this is +1. So if you think that Liverpool will win by more than one goal, you would bet on that. If Liverpool win by exactly one goal, that's a push. So neither side wins that bet. And then if Crystal Palace draw or win, you would win your bet on that side. Now, looking at this matchup, we've been talking about Crystal Palace for a couple of weeks. I'm not convinced by their defense. And Liverpool certainly have a talent mismatch here. Like they're better. But Liverpool have played midweek. Palace are fairly fresh. They don't have any new injuries going on there. Chiesa may be out for Liverpool. Don't think that that's like a huge miss so far. He's not been fully integrated, but he's one of their options off the bench. Anyway, I don't believe in Palace enough to pull the trigger on this. Last year, this would probably be a Palace bet, given like sort of how they finished out the season under Glasner. But I think they're still trying to figure out that midfield, and so we're going to leave that one alone. The next matchup here is one that I think is a good tester matchup for this weekend. So we've got the promoted team in Leicester City, and they seem to be the team that fixes everyone else's expected goals when you face them. It wasn't entirely true of Arsenal, but man, did Arsenal beat the pants off of Leicester last weekend. At least in the expected goals, it took 2 late goals, though, in order to basically make that -2 handicap for Arsenal a push. Then we see that they're facing Bournemouth. Now, Bournemouth have been actually pretty good this season and think that they are sort of considerably better than their traditional league placement and how you would traditionally think about them. We're not big Leicester fans at all. And in this case, like at a quarter goal, we like Bournemouth. So it means that if this game draws, you lose half of your bet. But generally, Bournemouth have been very good this season. They haven't always gotten the results. They certainly deserve to win or at least draw against Chelsea. Chelsea survived that one. And so I'm going to go with them on this game. It's not entirely comfortable, but I think they'll do all right. We talked briefly about the Arsenal-Southampton match earlier. Given full health for Arsenal, I would probably bet this at -2. At -2.25, I would leave it alone. It was good to see Mikel Merino back this weekend. They've still got some injury issues. Odegaard's probably not back for a few more weeks at least. Merino sort of came back very quickly. They look really good. They're firing on all cylinders. They don't allow anything defensively, but they did play midweek, and they played a very good PSG team midweek, although they didn't necessarily look that good. PSG actually looked like, a bunch of young players playing against Arsenal's men, which is kind of an unusual thing for Arsenal because they used to have the reputation of being the smaller technical side. And clearly they've graduated past that. Set piece is always a worry. I think that, Russell Barton is probably at least even to be one of the first 2 managers fired this or head coaches fired this season. The other one is Julian Lopetegui, who we'll talk about in a little bit. So yeah, I don't have any bets on this one. I think that the 2.25 keeps me off of that, but I certainly am not interested or excited to be betting on Southampton there. Next matchup is Brentford versus Wolves. Brentford are good when they're healthy. that has been the very clear dictate from the start of the season, particularly given that Norgard and Jensen both seem to be injured and having difficulty sort of coming back to initial fitness. So, maybe they'll see them after the international break. They also lost Wissa, who's quite a decent weapon there. So when Brentford are healthy, I think that they can hold their own against most teams, especially at home. Wolves also have a bit of injury issues, and they've had a tougher schedule. So -0.5 feels pretty treacherous in this way. I don't want to touch either of these teams on either side. You don't quite know what's going to happen. It feels like a good line, to be honest with you, from a bookie's perspective. So we're going to leave that alone. Then we hit the one that is sort of the next big tester game in West Ham versus Ipswich. For those of you who've been following our stuff on the newsletter and the weekly roundups, West Ham have been bad and worse than their talent, I think is how we describe it. Like we at the Transfer Flow, we did the summertime transfer grades. You can find that on the channel if you haven't seen those. We did not like West Ham's window at all. Thought that they overspent in the wrong areas, and they brought on some decent talent, especially in the center back space, but they're just so easy to play through right now. It seems like they're not causing real problems for anybody, and certainly not problems that to the degree that their talent should show. Ipswich are almost the opposite of that. Their transfer window was okay. They tried to thread the needle between getting players that were good enough to keep them up in or bring them back up once if they go to the championship next year. But they also probably had enough upside that if they did it right, and they have a very good coach in McKenna, they'd be able to navigate just right to that 17th spot, which would really propel them on to being, potentially a medium to long-term hanger-outer in the Premier League. I thought that this line would be West Ham sort of minus a quarter, maybe minus a half. Given that it's 0.75, which means if Ipswich draw or Ipswich win, you win your bet. If West Ham win by 1, you would lose half of your bet on Ipswich. If West Ham win by 2 goals or more, then you would lose your whole bet. I don't think Ipswich are good, but I do think they have a competent coach, and I think West Ham are a mess. It's possible that there's some Lopetegui masterclass that comes in. It feels a little loose to be betting a promoted dog away, but that's more about the lack of quality that we've seen in West Ham so far. Doesn't mean that they won't show up in this game. And if you're the pessimistic side, you're like, I don't like anything about that. Then stay away. Like your bets are your own. These are mine. But I'm on Ipswich this weekend at 0.75. All right. Looking at our next matchup here, we've got Manchester City versus Fulham. Fulham have been surprisingly good this season. They look like they could be, that little area in the table between like 8th to 10th. That's kind of the level that they seem like so far this year. Their summertime buys are performing well. Smith Rowe has been good. They ground out a 1-0 against Nottingham Forest, and there was potentially a controversial penalty last weekend, but both of the defenses did what they were supposed to do, which is gum up the game. Against City, normally you'd be like, oh God, I want nothing to do with Fulham at City. But this year, given that they can potentially gum up the game fairly well, and they didn't seem to be in any way worse than Nottingham Forest. City are still finding their feet and how to play with Rodri out for the rest of the year. They had a midweek, basically training game against Slovan Bratislava. Like they could have put any number of goals up on the board. They won 4-0 away, but it was really kind of Pep trying to get them out there, figure out how to play in his style with some parts that were not first choice parts. I would be happier at a +2 here. And I almost fully expect Erling Haaland to be like, yeah, here's a hat trick. I do this, seemingly once every 3-4 games in world football. But the numbers in my mind sort of lean this way, especially with Rodri being out. It could be wrong. We'll find out. There's some risk in this one, but I'm on Fulham at +1.75. Moving on to the next one. This one is very chaotic between these two teams. So Everton looks like the deal sign for Friedkin come in like that. I believe has been announced and it's waiting regulatory approval. I think that they'll spend in the January window. We know that basically Everton needs some real fullbacks and they could use some midfield help. Dyche clearly has to be frustrated about all the goals they're giving up, but they can attack and they have needed to attack. Unfortunately, their modus operandi this season has been giving up leads that they've had, but last week they came from 1-0 down and ended up beating Crystal Palace. They have life in them, effectively, is what I'm saying here. Newcastle have some injury issues, some knocks from midweek. Alexander Isak is out with a broken toe. Those can take time to heal and also sort of time to get back to fitness without major pain. So we'll see how long that he's out. Given that this is a home game and they're giving us a quarter goal, and Newcastle have not been particularly good despite their current league table position, which, there's something that when you model bet and you look at the numbers and the data behind it, like that's always something interesting. Like we're on Everton as quarter goal underdogs here. So we'll see how it goes. The models previously were much more punchy on Everton throughout the course of the year. They've settled down a little bit due to their early issues, but I think that one's probably right. Moving on to the Sunday slate, we have Chelsea versus Forest, and it's so interesting how quickly the narrative can reshape around teams that are playing well or playing badly. In this case, Forest are a team that we flagged up early in the season as probably better than what people expected them to be. They are playing very difficult football, especially when they're fresh. They're well coached, well regimented. Chelsea, on the other hand, up until the last couple of weeks, had struggled fairly mightily against most opposition. They dispatched Brighton pretty easily last week, but they still had the difficulty where they gave up 2 very simple goals off of goal kicks in their own box. That's something that's fairly dangerous. Brighton obviously high press, and Chelsea managed to push Brighton and get a couple of free goals themselves off of basically blowing up Brighton's build-up play from the back. So Chelsea obviously have a lot of talent. Nico Jackson and Cole Palmer have been flying high lately. But against a team that is pretty good in Forest, like 1.25 just felt a little bit too high. If this had been minus 0.75 Chelsea, minus 1 Chelsea, you're probably potentially going to leave it alone. Given the extra quarter goal, we would win half of our bet. If Forest lose by only 1, that felt okay. And Chelsea have no real fatigue issues from midweek because they changed literally their entire side to play in the Conference League. And if there's any team in world football that has real squad depth right now, it's clearly Chelsea. Aston Villa versus Manchester United. One of these teams is in the Champions League and is not Manchester United, although they did both play in Europe midweek. United, I think, picked up a couple of injuries midweek. Menu was injured. I thought that this line would be at least minus a half Aston Villa. I thought it could have been minus 3/4. United haven't been good for a full match against anybody. Like, just hasn't happened this season. They'll have like 35 bad minutes against every single team. Villa are frustrating for me to bet on. If Emery let them attack regularly, then I would be much more comfortable about that. But last week against Ipswich, they had 2 goals in a 5-shot 2-goal performance in, I think, the first 75 minutes or something like that, until Ipswich equalized, at which point he allowed them to start shooting again. The talent disparity against Ipswich is so big, that's just ridiculous. And it's something that Emery's teams have often displayed as a character trait throughout his history as a head coach. And the reason why we're betting this is partly because Villa are better than that, and I'm not terribly worried about them trying to sit on a lead against Manchester United, because Manchester United are just through traffic. Like they just let teams attack against them. It was the killer trait that they had last year that was one reason why they were so bad. They gave up, I think, the second most shots in all of the Big 5 teams in Europe last year. And then this year, they had seemingly stabilized a little bit, but they faced a pretty good Spurs team last weekend. Red card was there, but even before then, Spurs were dominating that match. So there's a good chance that Villa can dominate this match as well. They played reasonably well against Bayern. Bayern sort of pulled away in expected goals after Jean Duran's goal, but up until that point, it was pretty even. This could be a 0-0. It would be a stupid way to play it, especially if Villa want to finish in the top 4 again. But at a quarter goal, like, definitely being priced in here, even if I'm not super excited by it. And then we hit the late match on Sunday. A very exciting, interesting set of teams here, Brighton versus Tottenham. So Brighton's problem the last 2 weeks is they've been giving up dumb goals from their defensive side build-up. And it's seems like something that may be a regular trait. It's certainly something that they're going to want to work on as they go into the international break. Van Henke, I think, is out potentially for the next month with an adductor problem. which means that one of their center backs is out. You're going to get Webster and Dunk probably. Kadioglu also was one that got pressed out of the ball and gave up an easy goal last weekend as well. So we know that is a potential danger trait for Brighton against Tottenham. If they were the early season Brighton, like, you'd be pretty excited to be on their side at +1/4 at home. Spurs are playing very well right now. It looks like Son's going to be out for the weekend, so that's another issue they have to contend with. I don't know what to expect from this. And because I don't know what to expect, and because I have some worry that Spurs are also going to press the center backs in Brighton, and if they can't build up normally, like, what's their plan B? How effectively are they going to execute that? All that leads me to kind of leave this match alone. Normally, I would have had a lean toward Brighton. I think Spurs are finding their feet, but we'll see. Like, the Premier League's a tough league. Like, there's almost no competition from top to bottom, except maybe Southampton and West Ham right now, where you'd say, yeah, these teams are going to be pushovers. Like, you get 18 teams that can beat you on any particular weekend, especially if they come into the ground like fairly fresh and having the right game plan. So, weird things happen. It's fun. So it makes football fun. But in this case, we'll see. I'm going to watch the game and not have any sweats on that one. For those of you who are looking for more gambling analysis, I produce a pretty lengthy English Championship and English Premier League write-up that has a lot more stuff than the videos will, every Friday, and then any sort of midweek rounds that we need to. If you're interested, that's a subscription that you can find on thetransferflow.com. And the variance betting side of it is where you'll find that. But we give you 5 free days every single week of other stuff. During the season, you'll get team analysis, you'll get game analysis. We'll talk about exciting players to watch, up and coming ones that might be part of the transfer rumors in the future. And yeah, during the transfer season, we get to have tons of fun, making fun and finding new sources of potential players for all of the big teams around the world. Thank you very much. My name is Ted Knutson, and I will see you next time.